Russia doesn't lose wars when it's outgunned. It loses them when it loses time. And by 2026, Britain is helping NATO take that time away. Not with a super weapon, not with a sudden mobilization, but by making readiness so routine that Russia's slow phase disappears. Once that happens, Moscow can't probe, delay, or control escalation anymore. And that's why Britain's military in 2026 is a serious problem for Russia. Because from Moscow's perspective, Britain is no longer just another capable NATO member. It is becoming something far more dangerous. A country that removes delay. Russia's modern pressure strategy depends on time. Time to test reactions, time to exploit hesitation, time to split political responses before coordination hardens. That model has worked where ambiguity exists. Russia used that playbook in Georgia and Crimea, and tried it again early in Ukraine. It worked because Russia could move faster than its opponents could decide. Britain is helping close that gap. Unlike symbolic deterrence built around one-off announcements or crisis surges, Britain's direction toward 2026 is about routine readiness. Forces that are already integrated, already exercised, already positioned inside alliance planning. That matters because Russia does not fear strength in isolation. It fears inevitability. UK defense policy since 2023 has emphasized this shift. Not toward spectacle, but toward tempo. Not toward one decisive capability, but toward the ability to act without delay, hesitation, or improvisation. The emphasis is not on winning a short war, but on denying Russia the quiet phase it needs before escalation becomes uncontrollable. That changes the strategic environment. Russia prefers conflicts it can shape gradually. Britain is becoming a country that removes the gradual part. Where Moscow looks for ambiguity, Britain is embedding clarity. Where Russia hopes to slow coordination, Britain accelerates it. And where Russia relies on the assumption that NATO response will arrive late and uneven, Britain is increasingly positioned to make response automatic. This is the core shift Russia didn't plan for. Britain is not preparing to fight alone. It is preparing to connect, to link undersea awareness, airspace control, logistics, and alliance command into something that functions continuously rather than reactively. That means a crisis involving Britain would not begin with debate, it would begin with movement. And once movement starts quickly, Russia's leverage evaporates. This is why Britain's military trajectory toward 2026 is not about headlines or intimidation. It is about removing the one advantage Russia depends on more than firepower: time. And once time stops working for Moscow, everything else starts working against it. Quick pause. If you want clear, no-hype breakdowns of how military power is actually shifting, subscribe. Now here's the part Moscow really can't ignore. If Russia can tolerate pressure in the air and on the surface, it is highly sensitive to uncertainty beneath the sea. That's where Britain becomes unavoidable. Because while surface forces posture and aircraft signal, undersea forces decide whether escalation stays limited or spirals into something Russia cannot control. And by 2026, Britain's role in that domain hits directly at the backbone of Russian deterrence. Russia's military power ultimately rests on one assumption above all others: that its nuclear second strike capability remains credible, hidden, and survivable. Everything else, conventional forces, regional pressure, gray zone activity, rests on that foundation. Submarines are a core pillar of that system. If those submarines are ever believed to be vulnerable, even partially, Russia's entire escalation ladder becomes unstable. Britain knows this. Russia knows Britain knows this. And by 2026, that mutual awareness is exactly the point. Britain's undersea posture is not designed for visibility. It is designed for persistence, quiet patrols, continuous presence, long-duration readiness that does not spike during crises because it never fully stands down. That is what makes it dangerous. Russia does not fear submarines it can count. It fears submarines it must assume are already in position. Britain's continuous at-sea deterrent has operated on that logic for decades, but the environment around it is changing. By 2026, undersea competition is no longer just about deterrence patrols. It's about surveillance, tracking, and denial across entire maritime corridors. And Britain sits at the center of that picture. The North Atlantic, the Guyuk Gap, and the approaches to the Arctic remain essential to Russia's naval strategy. These are not abstract zones. They are the routes Russian submarines must pass through to reach the wider ocean, to disperse, and to maintain credible deterrent patrols. Britain's geography alone makes it relevant here. Its force design makes it decisive. UK undersea forces operate in an ecosystem that includes allied sensors, maritime patrol aircraft, seabed infrastructure awareness, and intelligence sharing that no single state could replicate alone. This is where Russia's discomfort grows, because undersea competition is not about certainty. It's about probability. Russia does not need to believe every submarine is being tracked. It only needs to believe that tracking is possible often enough to change its planning assumptions. By 2026, Britain contributes to exactly that effect, not by announcing capabilities, not by showing force, but by normalizing presence. When undersea surveillance becomes routine, every Russian deployment carries risk before it even leaves port. Routes must be adjusted, timing must change, command decisions become conservative. And conservatism is the enemy of pressure-based escalation. Russia's leadership understands this intuitively. Escalation only works when options feel flexible. Undersea uncertainty makes options feel brittle. This is why Britain's submarine posture matters, even when no confrontation is visible. It shapes the background risk calculation that Moscow carries into every decision. A regional crisis in the Baltic, a naval signal in the Mediterranean, an airspace incident near NATO borders. All of these look different when Russia must assume its most sensitive assets are already being watched. That assumption doesn't stop action outright, it slows it, and slowing Russia is often enough. There's also a second layer here that matters just as much. Nuclear signaling. Britain's deterrent posture is not independent. It is embedded in NATO's broader nuclear framework. That means any escalation involving Britain cannot be neatly separated from alliance-wide consequences. Russia prefers ladders it can climb step by step. Britain removes rungs from that ladder. An escalation that brushes against British undersea forces does not stay conventional for long in Moscow's strategic calculus. The uncertainty about thresholds forces restraint earlier than Russia would prefer. This does not mean Britain is seeking confrontation. Quite the opposite. It means Britain's undersea posture is designed to make escalation feel heavy from the very first step, and that weight reshapes behavior even when nothing happens. Here's the critical point for 2026. Britain does not need to outmatch Russia under the sea. It only needs to make Russia unsure. Unsure whether movements are being tracked. Unsure whether thresholds are lower than expected. Unsure whether escalation can be controlled once it begins. That uncertainty leaks upward into every other domain. Air operations feel riskier, naval deployments feel constrained, political signaling feels less effective. Because when the undersea layer becomes uncomfortable, everything above it becomes cautious. And that is exactly where Britain's next role comes into focus. Because undersea power alone does not break pressure strategies. It works in combination with something else Britain is building by 2026. A model of readiness that doesn't surge, it stays. Russia doesn't lose wars because it runs out of weapons first. It loses them when the other side refuses to slow down. That's the problem Britain creates by 2026. Because Britain is no longer structuring its military around crisis response. It's structuring it around continuous readiness. And that quietly destroys Russia's favorite phase of conflict. For decades, Russian strategy has depended on a predictable pattern. Pressure rises. The other side reacts. Forces surge. Politics flare. Then readiness fades as costs accumulate. Russia waits out the surge. That model only works if readiness is temporary. Britain is deliberately removing that assumption. By 2026, British force planning is less about dramatic mobilization and more about forces that stay available without announcing escalation. Units rotate without standing down, training cycles feed directly into deployment readiness. Logistics are designed for persistence, not emergency response. This isn't accidental. UK defense policy since 2023 has consistently emphasized something Russia struggles against: forces that can remain forward-ready without burning out. That matters because pressure strategies depend on fatigue. If the opponent doesn't tire, pressure stops accumulating. Britain's military design increasingly treats readiness as baseline rather than exception. That changes how Russia has to think before it acts. A naval deployment no longer waits for Britain to spin up. Air activity no longer assumes a temporary response window. Cyber and gray zone pressure no longer count on attention fading. The posture is already there. This is where Russia's timeline problem gets serious. Russia prefers escalation ladders where each step creates hesitation. Britain's model removes those pauses. When readiness is routine, escalation does not trigger a dramatic shift. It triggers continuity. And continuity is deeply uncomfortable for Moscow, because if nothing spikes, nothing resets. There is no moment where Russia can say, wait, they'll calm down. Britain's readiness posture also ties directly into sustainment. Ammunition planning, logistics resilience, maintenance cycles, and force regeneration are being treated as core military capabilities, not background support. That's not glamorous. It doesn't dominate headlines, but it decides who lasts. Russia understands this painfully well. Its own experience in Ukraine has reinforced the same lesson. Speed matters early, but endurance decides outcomes. Britain's 2026 posture is built to deny Russia the early advantage and then outlast the pressure phase that follows. This is not about Britain preparing for war. It's about Britain preparing to not blink. And when one NATO state doesn't blink, others don't have to rush to compensate. That steadiness propagates across the alliance, which brings us to the next layer Russia cannot avoid. Because Britain does not operate alone. And by 2026, Britain's most dangerous role is not what it can do by itself. It's how it connects everyone else. By 2026, the most dangerous thing about Britain's military posture isn't what it can do on its own. It's what it forces Russia to deal with whether it wants to or not. Russia prefers compartmentalization. Pressure here, calm there, one theater active, another quiet. That separation isn't accidental. It's how Moscow manages escalation without losing control. Britain quietly breaks that model because Britain does not operate as a standalone military actor. It operates as a connector. Undersea awareness doesn't stay British. Air posture doesn't stay national. Naval activity doesn't stay regional. It feeds outward. By 2026, British forces are structured to plug directly into NATO command, intelligence, and logistics systems without friction. That means a move aimed at Britain is never just a bilateral problem. It becomes visible, contextualized, and planned against across the alliance quickly. And that matters because Russia's pressure strategies rely on delay between detection and coordination. Britain compresses that delay. A naval movement doesn't wait to be interpreted. An air pattern doesn't sit in isolation. An undersea signal doesn't stay ambiguous for long, not because Britain escalates, but because Britain connects. This is why Russia cannot isolate the UK the way it has tried to isolate other states. Britain's role inside NATO is not symbolic. It is functional. It hosts, enables, routes, and sustains allied power as part of routine operations. So pressure doesn't stay local. It bleeds. A signal aimed at Britain touches Northern Europe. A maritime posture shift ripples into Atlantic planning. An undersea concern triggers multi-nation coordination early. Russia loses the ability to choose where the problem stays small, and that is a strategic failure, not a tactical one. Because once escalation cannot be localized, Russia's timeline collapses. It cannot probe slowly. It cannot test thresholds quietly. It cannot wait out temporary surges. Every move arrives in an environment that is already watching, already connected, already prepared. This brings us to the twist Russia finds hardest to counter. The threat is not a British superweapon. It is not a sudden spike in spending. It is not a dramatic mobilization moment. It is routine readiness becoming the baseline. By 2026, Britain's military posture is dangerous precisely because it does not change dramatically under pressure. It absorbs pressure without announcing escalation. It stays present without exhausting itself. It maintains readiness without creating political shock. That kills pressure strategies quietly. When readiness is permanent, pressure stops accumulating. When posture is steady, signaling loses leverage. When integration is routine, escalation becomes visible too early. Russia can still move. It can still signal. It can still threaten. But the environment no longer reacts the way it used to. And that is the nightmare scenario for Moscow. Because Russia does not lose leverage only when it is defeated in battle. It loses leverage when it cannot control tempo. Britain's 2026 military posture attacks that advantage directly, not with noise, not with spectacle, but with endurance. Britain doesn't need to dominate Russia to matter. It only needs to stay ready long enough that Russia's slow phase disappears. And once that phase is gone, pressure strategies stop working. That is why Britain's military in 2026 is a serious problem for Russia, not because of what Britain might do, but because of what Russia can no longer rely on: time. And when time stops working for Moscow, secondary effects start compounding fast. Because pressure strategies don't fail all at once. They fail when the cost of probing quietly becomes higher than the value of probing at all. That is the trap Britain helps set by 2026. Every Russian move has to be planned not just against British response, but against how fast that response will propagate. A naval signal no longer asks, "Will Britain react?" It asks, "How quickly does this reach Allied planners?" An air incident no longer tests a single threshold, it tests a network. That uncertainty forces Russia to self-limit before NATO ever has to. And self-limiting behavior is catastrophic for a strategy built on incremental pressure, because once Russia hesitates first, the entire logic flips. The side that was supposed to react is already ready. The side that was supposed to probe is now calculating risk. Britain doesn't need to block Russian moves outright to matter. It only needs to raise the background cost of every move until pressure becomes inefficient. That inefficiency shows up quietly. Fewer probes, shorter deployments, more cautious signaling, more internal debate before action. None of that looks dramatic on a headline, but over time, it hollows out leverage. This is why Britain's role by 2026 is so uncomfortable for Moscow. It doesn't present a clean confrontation, it presents a persistent dilemma. Act and accelerate alliance response. Pause and lose momentum. There is no good option.